Yeah, welcome everyone. And today's event theme is all about women in community management. So, of course, we've invited these wonderful kids. I'm just going to share my screen. And so we're going to be interviewing Sam Hepburn, who is the Developer Community Manager at Sync. We've got Debbie Bird, who is the Online Community Manager at APM. And we've got Faiza Mohammed, who's the Community Manager at Site Improve. So some amazing women here. And before we get started, just flicking the next screen. Before we get started, for anyone that is new today, CMX is the premium community for community managers. There are about 60 CMX Connect chapters around the world. And as CMX chapter leaders, we volunteer and run industry events around the world to help community professionals learn and connect together. And so we run our CMX London events on every last Thursday, every second month this year. So stay tuned to hear about the next event. Great. And for today's session, so this is going to be a 30-minute panel discussion, and then we're going to follow that with some breakout sessions. So you're going to get a chance to connect one-on-one with each other if you want to stick around towards the end. We're going to hopefully be able to fit in question time in that Q&A opportunity just after the panel finishes. So just remember to ask your questions in the Q&A box, and that way we can get to them at the end. Great. So that brings us to today. And I think that's the last of my slides. Great. So I'll stop sharing my screen and come back in. And yeah, so that brings us to today. So today is the last day of March, which is actually History Month on the calendar, the whole month. And the goal of today's session is to create a really safe space, an open space for discussion, so that we can dive into how we can help more women excel and succeed in the community management industry. And I think this conversation is really useful for everyone, not just women. So hopefully some men as well have joined us, and anyone else, because I think, you know, the more we can support each other, the more women who can support each other, the more men who can support women, and so forth, the better the industry will be. Great. So let's dive in. I just did a short introduction of each of our speakers, but let's go around and take about 30 seconds to, you know, really dive into who you are and what you've done in your community career, just as much as you can, the 30 seconds. But Sam, I would love for you to go first, and then we'll go around.
Of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Hepburn. I am head of global communities at SNEAK. So it stands for So Now You Know. A lot of people stumble on that. It's always a bane of contention of how do we say the name. But I've been doing communities for about 10 years. I had a very interesting sort of journey into community where I started off in hospitality, actually moved to finance for a while, office management, before going to my first ever software developer community event and realizing very much that was the space I wanted to be in, and also realized I didn't need to be a software developer to be in that space. It's kind of why I was at the event originally, was going, I'm going to learn to code. And fast forward 10 years, I have realized that software developers are my people. We are most of the time look at community managers as these extroverted, bubbly, loud humans that, you know, draw a crowd. And whilst I definitely can be those things, I also find that the community that you join can also match your personality on how much of that you can be and do. And so, yeah, so that's me. Hopefully that's enough to kick off the session, but thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sam. And Faiza.
Hey, everyone. My name's Faiza. I have been involved in communities professionally over the last 5 years. and more socially since forever. Like, so for as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to be part of some kind of group, and I remember joining communities and being really interested in the inner workings behind them, and like thinking, so how did we get everyone here? Like there's a lot of curation and orchestration behind bringing people together. So and that curiosity kind of led me to where I am today. I'm currently a community manager at Site Improve, where I'm effectively building the community from scratch, which is a really, really fun position to be in, and really, really excited. And really, it allows you to be creative, which I'm really enjoying right now. But previously have managed developer communities at Facebook, and then Bumble. I've done community operations in Bumble, as well as managing community again in Peanut. So yeah, it's kind of been across kind of the different sections of communities, which is a really great view to have, because then you're already thinking about so many different aspects that go into both all of community building, nurturing, and management. Just so important. And yeah, so that's a little bit about me, as well as the fact that, oh my gosh, I also run a community myself called Somalis in Tech, which I run outside of work, and actually is something is a community that was really dear to my heart, all born out of this idea of never really see other fellow Somalis in the industry, and met someone, and we said let's create this space, and now have over 1.5k members globally, that are either interested or already in the field of tech, and have been a real great opportunity to kind of facilitate those connections with people, continue growing skills, and so on and so forth. So yeah, really in this community bubble, but definitely a fun place to be. Really glad to be here.
Love that. Thanks, Faiza. And Debbie.
Right, where do I start? I've been in community probably nearly 20 years. I started out with a parenting website as managing editor, and the community came under that remit as well. So we had 400,000 pregnant women on the community, all in their own individual antenatal classes. So it was a very busy environment and a very busy community. From then I went to Scope, the disability charity, where I ran their community for about 18 months. And that was a public, free, open community, so anyone could join, and it was anonymous, which brought its own challenges, as you can imagine. And I'm currently at the Association for Project Management. I joined over 2 years ago to launch their online community for the project profession. So it's a completely different topic, yeah, quite interesting to get everyone engaged in talking about project management. So that's where I am at the moment. So community's been a bit sort of in my blood, if you like, and worked alongside lots of different professions and different departments to get them engaged in community.
Wonderful. Thank you all to our wonderful speakers. And so I just want to dive in. I mean, the industry in general has seen an enormous amount of growth, especially in the last year. But I think, yeah, it's interesting to see the industry as a whole. We've got, I think, probably on average more women involved in the community space than men. So maybe I'll start with a particular question. Why do you think the industry attracts more women to this industry? Maybe I'll go with Faiza. I think I went with you second, so I'll go with you first this time. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in regards to that question in particular, I think as any marginalized group, right? Because women are really a marginalized group in so many ways, and in terms of the way society has worked with the patriarchy and so on and so forth, women have always flocked to communities for as long as we can remember, in almost every stage of our lives, and the way we kind of navigate that community has always been something that we've either been a part of or always created. So I think it's very natural that more in the professional sense that we kind of gravitate towards that, because you have a lot of already naturally have a lot of the skills that takes to bring people forward and bring people together, which is really interesting in regards to when you make women-only groups or groups for specific audiences. Those folks that are more on the privileged side of the house would say, why aren't I allowed in those spaces, right? But it's because they kind of run the narrative, and everything's pretty much for them already. And it's like, how do we kind of curate those spaces? And I think, yeah, I think that's why it makes sense that a lot there are, if that's the balance, that there would be more women. I think the other typical answers are, of course, like just generally how women are raised in regards to empathy and nurturing, and being like just being very cognizant of those behaviors, which is so integral to building a community, as well as just also the passion behind community as well, of like being like really fiercely protective. I know my communities that I've run, I've almost been like my babies, especially when I've built them from scratch. It's something that means a lot to me. But yeah, those are some of the points that kind of come to mind when I think about why more women would be naturally attracted to going into the community sphere.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Did you have any follow-up to that, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to obviously echo and agree with a lot of those sentiments of who we are as human beings and generally our like DNA. But I also think we have the same, I suppose, biases that we see in a lot of industries where there aren't a lot of women, of, you know, our hiring managers sort of having a bit of a bias maybe to our male counterparts of not being as organized or not being as warm. And, you know, do we need to almost like take away the unconscious bias the other way? I see in my team specifically, so I'm in community, but I'm part of the developer relations team. And we see a lot more men in developer relations than women in community. So if you look at our like team DNA, we might look quite diverse, but actually we're sitting in our sort of norm roles. And so like I'm currently hiring another person. I'm actually looking for a male counterpart to kind of even, you know, sort of like bring another perspective into things. And vice versa, I kind of push our DevRel to look at a more sort of, you know, female diverse team. And so whilst I agree we have all these natural things and that's why people look for us, maybe we need to break down our own biases on trying to, you know, sort of diversify our own teams a little bit more.
It's really interesting. Sorry, I was just trying to unmute, but sorry, my camera's a bit bouncy as well for some reason. It's quite interesting because obviously I've been in the community for a long time, and I would say initially it was very much a female environment, that, you know, as you say, we naturally have a nurturing, bringing women together in particular. And I think women are attracted to women, in particular when I was in the parenting sector. You know, 97% of my community was female. So they probably were looking for a community manager to be female and to run them. But I've also seen how the profession has changed, because you know, I think a long time ago, 20 years ago, when the community started off, you know, like Net Mums and Mumsnet and all of those big, really very female dominated environments started, it was seen as, oh, they're just chatting. There's, you know, there wasn't the value that I think is brought to the business now, that women in this is becoming a real career option. Whereas I think 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, it wasn't. It was seen as oh, you're just having a conversation. Whereas I think it's developed so much. And I think for women coming into this profession, and I do think it is a profession, that it's important to look at you and your personality as well, because one of the things that it's, you know, it's you've got to have quite a lot of resilience, and I think women tend to have a really good high level of resilience anyway, and I think there's a need to be a connective type of personality. So I'm not saying, I think that's why it tends to be, or seems to be, very female dominated, because we have those natural skills. We're good communicators, we're good at diplomacy, we're good at just that side, and I think it's moved away from being just a technology thing. You know, you've got to have that. You've got to have an understanding of the science behind it, but you've also got to understand the softer, more the empathy, the you know, engaging with others, you know, from that perspective. So I think it's evolved a lot, and it's very exciting to see where it's going.
Love that. So I guess on the career path, there might be women or men here that are trying to build their teams, and I think there's also some people here that are also trying to climb the ladder. And I think is a typical career path, you know, community manager, you know, community director, VP, or head of community. Is that what we're looking at now, or is there another career path? Maybe Sam, if you want to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely, I mean, in all industries, there's a level of hierarchy, right? So when I started in community, I had to explain to everyone what I did because no one really got it. And now there are these things where I'm like, oh, this is like the hierarchical level of moving through an organization. But then I also think that the beauty of community and the beauty of it being in so many industries is then we also start to look at moves that are a bit different. So, you know, yes, we have the hierarchical thing that maybe I'll lead a team and maybe I'll, you know, go down that career path, or I might do so, as I said, I run technical communities. We've about to hire a more like technical counterpart in terms of their software developers that are coming in to nurture our community in a different way. And so theoretically our community managers, but looking from a domain expertise point of view. And then there's the sort of level up. We also have, you know, as we break up things, and also as obviously COVID's changed the world, we have some community managers that look a little more like events managers in terms of bringing the physical humans together and making that whole experience a thing. And then also looking at it from like a content point of view of like, what thought leadership do we have? What does our community want? And so I'm starting to see a lot more sort of diversity in terms of the types of roles and the fact that you don't only have to go up a ladder in order to be more senior within community, which is really lovely to see, because just because you're good at managing humans from a community point of view doesn't mean you want to be a people manager at some point. And so I'm loving seeing that sort of change in the community or the role.
Yeah, definitely agree. What about you, Faiza? Have you seen, is that what you're seeing, the typical career path, or are you also seeing a lot of diversity?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not, I don't think community management is particularly linear as in terms of like the path in terms of progression. However, I do feel like a lot of businesses across the entire scale now understand the value of having community. So a lot of businesses are now looking to make the investment. So just now, I'm in this position now of being the first community hire in my current place, which kind of means I'm kind of defining what community looks like from an organizational structure, as well as building the community. So I still feel like in a lot of ways, we kind of have to define where we want to go, which I think is a really great position to be in. I think it gives us a lot of opportunity to really carve out what we want as individuals and how we'd like to move forward. And I know that I really enjoy the more operational, now moving to the more operational side of community building and management. And now we're looking at expanding the team to possibly get someone to look after the day-to-day, which I've done before and I do enjoy, but definitely my excitement and passion comes from that little bit taking a step back from that and just really the operation side of it. So yeah, it's really interesting. I feel like as community professionals, we get an overview of what it takes to build and manage a community, but then we can start to see the aspects that we quite enjoy and really thrive in. And that's really how I see teams now being built out, through that kind of expertise and passion for certain areas of community.
Great. What about you, Debbie?
Yeah, I agree very much with Faiza and Sam. It's interesting because I didn't see my career going into community management. In fact, very much when I started, I was the managing editor of a huge parenting website, and although I had a community manager reporting to me, so I was overall responsible, but it didn't at that time think, oh, I want to be a community manager. Whereas now, 20 years on, I feel really quite empowered by being a community manager. And I think it's really interesting to see how it is changing. We've still got a lot of work to do. But I think, leadership teams, CEOs, people are starting to recognize the value of a community for their business. And therefore it's opening doors for community managers. And it's just broadening that horizon. For me, what I'd like to see is a little bit more status with the title. And I know that I'm not going to start this conversation because I know it will probably kick off. But community management and social media management are very different, very, very different. And I think in terms of career progression, how we're going to be titled and what status our role has, I think there needs to be some work on that to be able to build and develop our careers, and to recognize that how multitasked a true community manager is. And I think that's the thing, there's so many aspects of community management that are probably not seen. They think you're just moderating. You're not. There's so much more to it. I think you learn a lot from moderating and being there at the coalface, but there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that I don't think people realise and recognise.
I think we're getting some agreement in the chat. So yeah, maybe that's another event we could organise to discuss.
Oh, don't go down that route. I know. I thought I'm going to open a can of worms here. So about my camera, I don't know what was going on there. Yeah, I thought but as you say, another time.
Great. And so let's just make this conversation super practical for the last 10 minutes. So there might be some community managers that are starting off or trying to leap from a different sector to community management. What would your advice be for anyone kind of entering the community management space? I guess one thing would be where do you find the jobs? And where, if people are hiring, where do they post them? That's probably a good starting off point. Does anyone want to go first?
I think I'll just add in, I think, in terms of where to start, for me, I sort of fell into it for a different route. But in terms of where jobs are, I think it's really important to recognise what sort of community you want to work in. Because I think if you can sort of step back before looking for a job, do your research, look at what sort of communities are around. Do you want to be on a big public, very open forum and community, or do you want to be in a private membership only one? Do you want to work for a non-profit? Just identify what is your passion and what really you believe in, because if you haven't got real belief and passion in the community that you're managing, that will come through, and then it becomes a real task to do the job. It's a hard job. This is not an easy job. Don't let that put you off. I think the rewards outweigh the challenges that you will have. But come on, we can go for it. Let's go for it. We can do this. But I would, for me, it's find your key interest. What's your passion? What do you really want to do? And then go looking for those organisations. A lot of charities have communities because it's a support mechanism. So if you're interested in being a community manager on a charity, then Charity Jobs is quite a good space to look for. They tend to post them up there, if that helps. Anyway, just my thoughts.
Definitely think there's a element of also understanding that it's okay to change your mind. I also fell into community as a role. And then I thought it was everything about community that I loved. And so I kind of pivoted out of, not necessarily out of technology, but I love design. So personally, if I'd ever relived my life, I would have gone and become a designer. So when someone said, do you want to build a community for designers and product managers and all these things, I was like, yes, definitely. And actually, I didn't like it. And it's okay if you also make decisions that you realize as you're learning. I almost say, like, you need to treat your career like a startup, and you need to pivot sometimes. And so figuring out, what is your passion, what skills do you have, and what does the market need? And it's okay to start figuring out how that works with you personally. So never think that the thing you decide, especially early on in your career, now I've just got to stick to it. You can figure out how you fit in the world, and that's true for any type of role. The other thing I'd say is that even though community is stepping forward in terms of career, people are still struggling to give them titles on job specs. So I'd say figure out what you want to do, and then you might be also needing to troll through marketing roles and other roles to figure out, oh, they actually need a community manager here, they just didn't call it that. Now we're lucky that we can filter by community role, and obviously, sort of plug the platform we're on today. CMX has got a great job board and Slack community for you to get involved in trying to find those roles. But also know that there might be a little bit of filtering through the weeds on what do I want to do. That job title might look slightly different depending on the industry and where you are.
Yeah, I couldn't echo Sam's point enough, especially in regards to titles. I don't think titles are quite consolidated, and a lot of companies, as you said, have only just started creating and investing in community. So looking for their first community hires really often the case. My advice is definitely join communities. Like there's so many communities of community managers that are starting to crop up now, which is really exciting. It's amazing. Like the fact that all our learning is in one place, all our jobs are in one place, and seeing the expansion and further investment of community teams. These community managers are looking for people for their own teams as well. So really just kind of making sure that you're in these spaces. It may not look as simple as just a Slack channel, but there's loads of there's followings on Twitter you can gain of other community managers, and just follow people's works, which is really helpful. So that's one way of getting kind of the get to know on jobs that are happening at the moment. Something that I wish I knew when I first coming into the industry is that when I knew community management is what I wanted to do, I think I came a bit later than some of the other panelists here. I'm probably the newbie here, but definitely the privilege I have is for sure having more frameworks available and learning materials available than ever before, and having so much online education on the actual work of community management. And something that I'd say is take the time to do some reading and learning some frameworks ahead of going for some roles, because the interview process for these roles, they're so what are you going to do? And it's really great to kind of pull that out of your pocket and say, here's how I'd approach it. So yeah, that is definitely an advice I'd give as well.
Yeah,
don't forget to also steal from other roles you've been in or industries. Half the stuff, it was unfortunate that we didn't have as many frameworks when I first started, but we kind of stole them from other places. It is kind of hard to measure success in community sometimes. And so we looked, well, how is marketing measuring success? How is this team measuring? How do, developers do their sprints and project plan their work? And what things can we steal, borrow, big, I don't know what you want to call it, to make, sort of community more of a thing that we can measure on and be strategic in. So if you are career changing, don't think that whatever you learned before was now out the window and now you've got all these new things to learn. You've probably got a whole bunch of resources and tools that would do so well in community. So bring them with.
Yeah, I think maybe highlighting some of those companies that are doing tooling and training programs really well. Obviously CMX have their whole training program that you can, and the Slack community as well. There's everyday people in community management are posting questions and ideas and podcasts and frameworks and things like that they're coming up with. So definitely check out that, the Slack channel. There's also like ComSor, Community Club, any other like brands you think worth highlighting to look out for them?
Yeah, the other one that's quite good if you're in a membership community is MemberWise, because they're quite handy to got quite a good community. There's quite a lot, and I think I would also say look into all the platform providers as well, because I think that's quite key to understanding the software for communities and knowing the difference between having something that's bespoke and also something off the shelf, because they all do something different and everyone's looking for that uniqueness. And actually, it's probably better just to keep, yes, people want to talk to each other. Let's make it as easy and as seamless as possible. So understanding the platforms is pretty good as well for you as well, career-wise.
Yeah, and I think check out newsletters. So Rosie Cherry, she does a great newsletter every week, as well as like a bonus one. And I think he's the community manager. Evan, is it Evan Hamilton? Yeah, he's great as well. There's a bunch of community managers that do newsletters, and there's, I think, that a DevRel community manager newsletter that I'm signed up to. But DevRel have some great frameworks as well, and yeah, they look at community in a whole different way.
Yeah, I was going to say that I created a new Twitter account, which is a Twitter account everyone knows me on. Pfizer tweets for those who want to follow. I effectively created that just so I can follow other community professionals, and that has proved to be a really great network for me. I don't really use it for personal stuff, but just mainly just to keep up with the community scene, what's everyone up to. Really love getting commentary from other community managers on what I'm doing. Serena, you're like one of my favorite responders. Yeah, so definitely I do recommend, if you don't have a Twitter account, maybe creating one just for community.
I suppose just one tool that I found quite useful that's not necessarily on building your own community knowledge, but one of the things we do is obviously we choose the platform, we choose the thing, and we try build our community around the platform, and that's how we measure success. And a lot of our community will come to where we are. So they'll sign up to Slack if we're on Slack, or they'll do whatever the platform is. But a lot of the time your community is doing stuff on other things, and it's really hard to measure. And so there's loads of different tools. I personally use Orbit Love, but there's ones that are different to that. And what it does is it plugs into your Twitter and your GitHub or your, all your different places, and it pulls a heartbeat of the community across all the platforms. So you can really start to measure your success and understand a human's interaction with your community and kind of meet them where they are. Like the joy of community is meeting humans where they are, not forcing them to, if they're happy to be, they're great. But, sometimes we go off and do other things. So I'd also say if you're looking at tooling and stuff, think about ways in which you can understand the whole pulse of your community, not just the part of the world you want them to interact in, because those are amazing humans, but there's all these other humans that you could be understanding.
Awesome. All right. So I think we've gotten some tips out there, and hopefully if you mentioned any newsletter, podcast, websites, maybe just drop the link in so that everyone can check them out. Yeah, and your Twitters as well. And I think always good. I try and tweet as well, at least a couple of times a week. And I think we'll just jump into question time. I just want to highlight, I didn't mention at the beginning, but Serena, this is going to be her last CMX Connect event. And we're super sad about it. She's going to be saying a few things towards the end. So I really hope you can stick around, because it is really relevant to this discussion as well. She'd love to share more on that. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that. Before we jump into the Q&A. Yeah, so pop your questions in. I think we've got 2 questions, did we? Or did you want to read them out, Serena? Or maybe I can read them. Oh no, I'll read them. So Christy, is she still here? She's asked, do you think that the pandemic has helped raise the level of community management as a profession based on the fact that companies mainly started appreciating community more? Does anyone want to take that question?
I mean, the short.
Quite interestingly, actually, quite interestingly, I was aware of communities before the pandemic, and I took the job at APM to build their community, and I knew it was going to be a challenge. And the lockdown happened literally 2 weeks before we were launching our brand new community, and I would say the pandemic definitely raised the profile of communities, because suddenly everyone went, how do we keep in touch with everyone? Let's do a community. And it just seemed like on LinkedIn everyone was launching a community to try, but not with good knowledge of how to launch a community. So I would say yes, it definitely raised the profile, but I don't think it was sustainable.
I always say we're not the colouring in department, and you see that a lot. And definitely when the pandemic hit, it was like, oh, community, go sprinkle your fairy dust and make everyone talk to each other and bring them to us. And we're like, well, actually, it's a very strategic role, and we still need to put some work around, regardless of whether we're all locked at home or not. I think what the joy of the pandemic did for the community was showing how accessibility is a huge problem. We build communities in major cities a lot of the time, and so we're spoiled. If you're based in London, New York, San Francisco, you can almost go to a community event pre-pandemic any night of the week, and that was great. But we never thought about working moms. We never thought about people who had to work late or who didn't want to then spend their evenings at the pub learning about something new, not because they're content. And I think the pandemic, one, helped us understand that, and also helped us understand that regardless of where a human is based, whether it's in London, Bristol, Singapore, the Philippines, we need to make our content more accessible. And so I think that's one thing that we did very well during the pandemic. And yes, it raised our profile, and now we're seen a little bit sort of higher in the food chain of organizations. But still, I think we're a little bit viewed as the colouring in department of go sprinkle your dust.
Interesting. Yes, I think I see that too. I'm just going to move on to the next question. So from Lydia, she's asking what kind of experience is important in making the transition to becoming a community manager? So like hiring managers and employees look out for, because at the moment she's in social media and she really wants to make the switch to building online communities. Any thoughts on that, Faiza? Or
yeah, it's really interesting. I think the transition into community management, I feel like it's one of those things where you can get involved in communities outside of work, and start. I definitely, my volunteering work in communities prior to community management really helped me get into the industry, and it also brings a different point of view outside of the profession, which I think is really important to have, because you can focus way more on the human aspects of it, the fun part of it, without the need of worrying about, like, I guess, the business side of things, the metrics, the proving value to stakeholders and stuff like that, which is like the less fun part of the role. But I definitely recommend having your fun with community first, and seeing, we're in London, there's so many different kinds of social communities here. I'm part of several social communities here in London, and see how you can get involved in that way. And I think definitely it's a really great way to test out where you really, what you personally enjoy, and what and then you can kind of like continue with that going forward, and be very clear that this is the aspects of community I really enjoy and thrive in, but also being really honest about what there is to learn. And I've never not gone to an interview situation and said, hey, these are the areas that I like to grow in, actually, that I've kind of seen, and I'm really keen to do that in this role. And it's okay to not know absolutely everything. There's a lot of frameworks, there's so much education, free education, paid education out there. I think it's definitely something you can learn, so I wouldn't ever let that put you off. But it just starts with passion, and I really do think with community really does begin with the passion, and you can build on that.
Also, don't be scared to reach out to communities. Go back to that point of like get involved. Like my first couple of years was very much I had no title and I was running around after hours doing all these things. But I think a lot of the time we think, oh, you know, I don't want to be a bother or a pain. As a community manager who runs communities internally and externally, I love it when a human goes, can I help out? And yes, maybe helping out at first might be checking humans in on the door or helping with some admin and things. But as soon as a lot of people put their hand up and then do nothing. So as soon as you put up your hand up and actually do something, it is the most valuable thing to a community manager. So don't be scared to reach out to a community that you like and go, hey, can I get involved? Trust me, the worst they can say is no, and then you go to another one. So if you want more experience, that's a good way to do it.
We like super members. We like these MVP folks that come up, and I think that's also a really great role to take in a community as well. Being those MVPs or super members of communities is a really great step up because you just get a little bit more responsibility without actually taking the role of the manager. It's a really good insight too.
So I've got a bit of a metric question coming through from Giovanna. She's asking what kind of what kind of data is useful in the community space to measure impact in our work from communities, in our communities. So basically, what metrics do you use? Who wants to go first?
Well, I can say something. It's why my face grimaced because I think it's one of those. It's one of those questions that should go back to what is of value to your members. And yes, it's important to have people in your community, but if you've only got 100 people and they're all engaging, then that's a good community. And I think we get very, very easy to just think, oh, I've got to have hundreds of thousands of people in my community to make it of value. And I think this is where, sorry about my camera, this is where the data gets really, I think, really difficult to measure. Yes, I can measure how many people have logged in and I can measure how many people are visiting, people have liked a comment or they've interacted with a comment. I can measure all those things, but just because they've liked it, you know, is that a true engagement? And it's just really hard to know. And I think that it should go back to what you as an organization and your community, what do you want that benefit to be? And if that benefit is you want 100 people to come in and just like a post, then you're going to meet your, you know, that's your target. Whereas if you want to measure an impact on the business and sales and then, you know, you've got those metrics and you've got to find the right tools to measure that for you. But it does come back down to what type of community have you got and what is important in that community to be measured. So you can keep a track on, you're always going in a good direction. But sometimes communities burn out as well. I mean, sometimes sometimes you can start a community and it's all really busy and buzzing and then it just drops off and you just think, well, maybe people just don't want to talk about this anymore. So again, the data can just say whatever you want it to say, really. I think this is where a skill of a community manager comes in, that you've got that feel of your community as well. So yeah, it's my fault.
I mean, I agree on the engagement versus numbers thing 100%. I have this argument all the time, and I think the problem a lot of the time is what the business measures as value is not always what the community wants. And so it's juggling how do I report this to my stakeholders and give the community what they need? I learn a lot from other industries, and funny enough, sales helps me a lot, even though I would say I'm not a salesperson any form of means. But if you look at a sales, sort of, they have I don't know if everyone's seen like the sales bullseye. And I measure community a lot like that. So I would say the outside of the circle is my people who don't know about community. Then we've got the lurkers, who are the people that maybe click and read the post or something like that, but don't engage in any way. Then we've got the next thing of the likes, the interactions, and the little dot in the middle is that super user that interacts, that comments and posts and shares. And we measure based on those number of different attributes and trying to move everyone from outside the circle into the middle. But also we need to understand that we as humans, also I find the stuff on CMX uberly valuable, and I probably interact with the content 5% of the time because we're community members and we're busy and we're trying to manage things. And so if people measured that as a successful community, all those communities would disappear for me. And so understanding, you know, how much your percentage of your community are you okay to be lurkers, okay to be sort of I hate the word lurkers, but it's the only way of using it, but okay to be that next level. And then how many do you really need as those super advocates? And then nurturing them. All your time is mainly based around those humans. How do we give them the platform to grow, because they will pull all the other humans with them. But it is tricky and it is hard. And it's a constant struggle. The one thing I will say is if you look up on CMX, the thing that helped me when I was measuring, I lost my first community job because I couldn't measure success. So it's a big passion of mine. And there's something called the SPACE model, which allows you to identify what type of community you have. So it's support, product, acquisition, content, and engagement. And then they give you examples of what you should be measuring based on those things. So it's a great place to start. There's a load of other things that come from that, but if you're not measuring anything, look up the SPACE model in CMX and go from there.
I love that. Yeah, I think on like my side of things, we really dig into that every single week, but the value is what we can bring to. Often we'll see it as like insights that drive new products, new content, new, you know, whatever it is coming from the community. So like number of pieces of content that's touched by community or developed by community. Yeah, other metrics we use is like retention. So, you know, we measure churn week on week. And then like on the event side, it's like RSVPs and NPS. Lots of different measurements in community.
Yeah, it's really important to also figure out where does community stand in terms of the business and the company's goals. I think that's where the real strategic side comes into community, because often when you go for community jobs, and if it's the case where you're the first community hire, it's not entirely clear that you're going to be managing that aspect as well, of really driving communities' responsibility and visibility in the internal company, and the overall goaling around that. And I think the biggest thing to take from that is really managing expectations as well as really clearly defining the role. So just like Michelle just said about the community plays a role in building insights and so on and so forth. And that is really just internal facing, right? Just to manage the expectations of people. Here's how we provide value. And I feel like if you really get that right, then it's so much easier to kind of build metrics, as a lot of the metrics are going to be for yourself, I think, and maybe a select few for the wider company. I think there is danger of too much context from people that don't probably understand too much of your work and don't need to know everything. But those select few metrics, which there's even vanity metrics as well that we may measure that make that are valuable to the company. But us as community managers, being as like critical as we are, criticizing and wanting more out of our communities, we're often really hard on ourselves. And actually the rest of the company just want to see those vanity metrics and have those handed over while we kind of continue our work. So that's something that comes to mind.
Can I add one more thing? I know we're running out of time. The one thing I did that I think I did the right thing and the wrong thing all at the same time was I kept my community almost away from the business in a way that we were building this community, and we didn't want our sales guys to see, oh, I don't know, Facebook just signed up, let's try to sell them a deal. And so there was this like protecting the community whilst, you know, trying to influence it. And I think that was good and bad in all this in a number of different ways. But if you can choose any tool that you can actually bring your community members into your CRM system, still gate them from your sales team. But what then you can start to see is, okay, fine, maybe our community has never affected our deals. So, you know, no one's like joined our community and then signed on the dotted line and made the company 10 million pounds. Maybe they have, but you can measure that. But you can also start to see influence. So more of our customers who are part of the community renew their deals or are more likely to expand. And then you can actually measure a business value against your community. And that's where you can start to show like actual impact within. So you can now measure, you know, if someone's a community member first, maybe they're more likely to sign a deal. If they have X amount of team members within the community, they're more likely to renew, they're more likely to expand. And then you can show your influence on money made within the organization. There is an element of still gatekeeping because, you know, people don't love to be sold to. But that one thing that I learned was a bad thing that I gatekept, but I still need to do it in a way that protected my community, but now I can measure value. So just something to think about.
Amazing. Honestly, I think this discussion has been so helpful for not just having the discussion about women, but also like how are people practically getting started? How are they measuring their impact from day one? And, you know, where can they, you know, progress in their career? So I think hopefully everyone's gotten a bit of, you know, value wherever they are in their career, if they're new to community, if they're not even started. But yeah, I really want to say thank you to both all Pfizer, Sam, Debbie, everyone here, and also all our community members that have joined, and anyone that's new to the CMX community. Welcome and thank you for coming. I think that kind of leaves us for today. I think we have a few more questions. If there's anything else you want to ask any of our speakers, any of our CMX Connect hosts, then please contact them on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm sure you can find them. Their Twitter's linked to the actual event page, so you can find them through there. I'm gonna hand it over to Serena because she has been an amazing person who has built this CMX Connect program from day one. So I and Nancy started the chapter in April 2019, and so it's almost been 3 years now that we've been working together. And this is a volunteer job; like this is what we do for fun. But it does feel like we are losing, you know, a massive team member and, you know, someone that's just a core person of CMX and CMX London. So yeah, I want to give her the last 5 minutes, and yeah, please everyone stay on to hear from her. But yeah, Serena, please go.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, it's a tough one, really. Yeah, three years at CMX London, so 3 eventful years. Yeah, and about 14 years in the online community building profession. Starting off on social, as many of us do, and then moving more into owned organizational communities. So yeah, the topic of women in community is very important, not only for, you know, this month where we're thinking about the importance of women in general, but just topically thinking about the importance of women in the community profession, and yeah, thinking about what we can do going forward. So for me, lots of things we've touched on already today about the work of bringing people together, that is ideal, you know, it's ideal work for women who have stronger skills in relationship building, empathy and cooperation according to science. But what does it take to succeed in the community building profession? And I think there's 3 not so secret ingredients that I will share with you all, some of which we've touched on today, but hopefully I'm reinforcing it. The first one I'd say is inclusion. Inclusion matters. We need to start making it easier for people to enter the community profession and to progress their careers. And I think that starts with the hiring process. If you haven't done any research around pay transparency is a huge problem in multiple different countries and in multiple different industries or professions. And it is absolutely an issue for community. Pay transparency on its own could reduce the gender pay gap by a staggering 40%, according to research. But the community job boards and websites and social media networks are still full of rules where you have to be a street magician to guess the salary and the offer. How do you know if you can get the job if you don't know if you can pay your bills? How do you know if you can get the job if you can't take maternity leave? And as a woman, that's pretty important, right? So I think we need this to change. It's not just for women, but for everybody, actually, because people of colour are disproportionately impacted by the salary street magician secrecy that's occurring too. Hiring managers, organisations and community job boards and community organisations, this one's on you. Thank you. So the second one I'd say is representation. Representation matters as well. And we have a lot of fantastic women. We've heard from a few of them today. We've got a few of them in the chat here. And we've had lots of people join us at CMX London and in other events elsewhere. We need to see the work and the voices of women represented consistently in the community profession. This means ensuring that women are recognised for their contributions and that their work is respected by the leaders of their teams and their organisations. Unfortunately, I think we've probably all been on the receiving end of that ourselves. And unfortunately, we have probably seen and heard things which have disappointed us as well. If a woman has led on a piece of work, give her the platform or give her the credit. I think it's really that simple. And hopefully you'll all agree. If an organisation is drowning out the voices of women, if your organisation is drowning out the voices of women, you might have the confidence to challenge that, in which case, you know, go ahead, because now's the time really, isn't it? Or you might have the wisdom to move on. And the third thing to say is the integrity matters. And that's really important for all of us, but it's particularly important when we're thinking about women in the community profession. So when we're in the business of fostering trust, we need to keep integrity at the heart of what we do. We need to follow the examples of our leaders, and we need to set examples for others to follow. And that's whether we're women in leadership in the community profession, whether that's we're leading our own communities and our own organisations, or more broadly. So we need to draw boundaries about what is and isn't acceptable within our own teams and with what we see in the profession that surrounds us as well, and in the industries that we work in. And when those boundaries are crossed, or we see things that concern us, we need the confidence to challenge, or we need the wisdom to step away altogether. And sometimes if you're in a super toxic place and you're seeing red flags all over the place, and unfortunately sometimes that can happen, you might need to make the decision to walk away, or you might want to stick around and actually challenge things and try and change that culture. And that's a really positive and constructive thing to do as well. And ultimately, I think with integrity, we lead with our hearts and we lead with our feet. So for me, just thinking about those three things, so inclusion, representation and integrity, we are all in this together. So our own professional communities matter as much, if not more, than the ones that we build in our jobs. And we need to invest time in building a network of peer support, a space to be honest, to ask questions, share what we've learned, and to help each other out. And I'm so grateful to have been part of building a community of practice in London. I'm so grateful to be part of a number of other communities of practice for community professionals, and there's one in the non-profit space that I'm helping to lead at the moment as well. These matter. These are the spaces where we do the, is it just me, or is this weird, or can I ask how we do this thing, or I'm really frustrated and you'll understand. Those are the spaces, you know, whether you're in DevRel, whether you're in non-profits, whether you're in e-commerce, fintech, you need those spaces too. So as I leave my role at CMX, you might be wondering, what's she going to be up to? No, not going to be hanging out on a lilo in London. So I'll be shifting my energy and my time to supporting community professionals in charities and non-profits. Actually, they work tirelessly with below market salaries to solve some of the world's most complex problems. So join us if you want to really take your community skills up a notch and then try and solve some of the world's really tricky problems. But yeah, I'd also like to say that I'm hoping to develop some ideas on how to better champion and advocate women in the community profession, because I think at the moment that's still a bit of a grey area. So you can expect to hear more from that soon, but I'd love to know if anybody else is particularly passionate about that as well and would like to join me on that journey. So yeah, you can find me at goodcommunity.co.uk and on the socials. But yeah, thanks ever so much. I also want to give a shout out to two people in this panel right now, Michelle and Lauren, who both do fantastic work and often don't get the credit for the work that they do, or they don't have their voices shared as widely as I'd like to see them shared. So I'm giving big props to both of you, and whatever the future holds for CMX London, I know it's going to be a bright one. So many thanks.
Thank you, Serena. And yeah, honestly, you've been over the last 3 years and been an absolute cheerleader for everything I do, and I know that Lauren does as well. And yeah, it's thank you so much for everything you do. And yeah, have a wonderful day, everyone, and hope to see you at the next CMX event. We'll send details shortly. And thanks again to our speakers.
Many thanks, folks.
Thank you
Thanks
all.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good day, everyone.